Mr. Jim. Appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for the flexibility too on the podcast. And quick way to get started, give us 60-second brag of your background and what led you to where you're at in your career today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I started my career as an engineer, designed equipment for the Navy aircraft carriers. That led me in aerospace, doing failure analysis. And as I was doing failure analysis, a lot of the failures were actually happening in manufacturing. So that led me to doing some work in manufacturing process optimization, process control, saved the company I was working for a lot of money, and they decided I should move into management. Spent 2 years in an executive development program, got an MBA, and went around, worked in finance, strategic planning, marketing, and ended up doing technology development and running a business unit. And from that, I got into turnarounds, a number of turnarounds at a couple of different corporations. And then at the end of one of the turnarounds, I decided it'd be a good time for me to stop traveling, moving, and spend more time with my family. So 21 years ago, I started my consulting firm and have been consulting all over the world ever since.
That's amazing. What do you like most about consulting globally?
What I like about consulting globally is, number one, you get to meet a lot of interesting people, different cultures, different perspectives that you don't always get just in the U.S. And also I get to see a lot of different industries, and then you start seeing the common denominators that go across different industries. So started in aerospace, I've worked in automotive, pharmaceutical and biotech, electronics, repair facilities around the globe. And pretty much there's a lot of standard things that you can do regardless of the business to get improvements.
Yeah. What are some of the nuances of aerospace and some of these, marketing, business development in these complicated industries that have made you successful over the years?
Some of the big things that I was able to do in aerospace was understand the technology side, but understand the process side and the business side. So the real nuances there is making sure that you're talking in a language that the people understand, and that from the top down to the bottom up, everybody could see where you're looking to take the business. It's not just about taking out cost or getting rid of jobs. It's about getting all the employees involved with making improvements, and that's really where the leverage comes from. When you work with senior executives, they might have objectives about reducing cost, improving growth, getting more profitability, but the real leverage comes from when you take that concept and flow it down to all the employees, and they get engaged. And when all your employees are aligned in the same direction, you're going to get much better results than a few senior executives sitting in a conference room.
Expand on that a little bit further.
Say that again?
Oh, expand on that a little bit further. Employee engagement, was it? Yeah.
A good example would be cash flow. Like in a large corporation, they were worried about cash flow. So the thing that we were able to do there was, because they were aerospace and defense, and historically they'd just gotten cost plus contracts, when it became competitive, they need to worry about making a margin on it because they weren't getting cost plus. So the cash flow became a big deal, and employees didn't understand cash flow because in the past all they did was their work, and they weren't tied to when do we get paid for that. So we communicated down to all the employees, making sure they understood the contracts, what payable events were, and all the line items that needed to be closed for a payable event. So when they knew what all those line items were, and they could see there's one open event, might be some simple documentation to get paid, they would then close out those events, know that they had generated cash flow, and that flowed right to the bottom line in terms of our cash flow for that large aerospace company.
So that's almost like an open book policy in a way.
Absolutely. The more employees know about the business, the more they can help you. Another example was inventory. The company was worried about having too much inventory turns. And what the employees need to understand is they don't need to run out everything. If they thought they were doing a good thing, if they put a certain material on, why don't I make all of these while this is up? I'm saving the company money. I'm going to run it out. I don't need to do another changeover. But what they didn't realize, if they were making more than they needed, and we put it on the shelf and didn't sell it for 2 years, that was going to be slow-moving inventory and would also have an impact on the cash flow in the business. So communicating to them, just make what we need per the schedule, and don't worry about the cost of the changeover. We're going to focus on that separately to take the cost down on the changeover. That allowed them to understand what the impact of what they were doing was on the business, and then we got a big improvement in overall inventory turns.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You wouldn't think in an industry as sensitive as aerospace and defense that having that close of a tie with the financials and employees would be something that's been a winning strategy that you've experienced.
It's in every industry, whether it's pharmaceutical, a good example on the other end of the spectrum. Pharmaceutical had extremely high margins. Everything was under patent. They could literally charge what they wanted while their drugs were under patent. But as they came off of patent, and all of a sudden there was generic versions of those drugs, they need to be competitive. They didn't worry about that in the past. So now you got to flow down to all the employees saying, what can we do to become more efficient? What can we do to optimize the way we're doing things so we can reduce our costs, so we can be competitive with generic drug manufacturers? That's how they survived all those years, being efficient. So there's opportunities everywhere, whether you're a high margin pharmaceutical or a tighter margin aerospace and defense company. It's just a matter of taking a systems level view of your business, understanding what's important, and then drilling down on the critical processes and engaging all the employees in alignment with those objectives to get there, and you'll get the business results.
When you talk about unleashing your business potential to grow, what do you mean by that, and what are the steps for that?
Sure. When businesses are growing, there's a couple of key things to think about. One of the big ones on the front end is, how can I improve my value added? So a lot of companies I work with, I have a few examples right now where they were a distributor, and they were making medical product distribution model that they had, and they were investing in inventory and kind of a middleman. A large, big pharma company needs something, they go to them, they sell it. They saw their opportunity to growth by actually coming up with some assemblies and sub-assemblies and doing some value added from a design perspective that had features that were something that a pharmaceutical company would be interested in. So now, rather than just getting your little bit of margin on a pass-through because you bought the stock, you had it on hand, now you're actually adding value added. And then from that step, they got into bigger assemblies, and now they're working directly with the big pharma on the value added side, which is the design of the solutions, and then having a captive customer as a strategic supplier partner, as opposed to just a distributor. They call you up. If you don't have it, they hang up and they go somewhere else. So that's the key to value added, is really understanding what's critical to your customers and trying to do that more efficiently and more effectively from their perspective. Another thing that goes with that, though, is as companies grow from small to large, scalability is a very big thing to think about. So if you're a mom and pop, I work with mom and pops that are growing and they're being acquired, for example, or invested in through venture capital companies. Now they're mid-size. When you're small, you can do almost everything yourself. Maybe you've got a couple of partners and y'all cover everything. But as you grow, you can't say, oh, that if you need that, go to Joe. If you need that, go to Sally. It's not a person, it's a process. A person becomes the constraint and it's not scalable. A good example was there was a company I was working with, and they had digital solutions for aerospace entertainment systems. So your audio, visual, lighting, movies, and it all went through the senior guy. And so he made all engineering decisions. Everything was reviewed by him, and they had hit a plateau, and there was a big investment coming in. I said, you can't grow with everything going through you. We need to develop processes and drive it down into the organization that are repeatable and scalable, so that as we grow, different people have different responsibilities for different gates throughout the process, but everybody knows what the objectives are. We have metrics to measure how we're doing, and we're not relying on one person to make all decisions. So that's another big element when you want to grow, is thinking about scalability and what are the constraints to growth are, what are your critical processes, and then align that with your value added, and that'll unleash your growth potential.
Yeah, you find that a lot. Businesses, you see them stagnated, and then that next uptick is almost stuck on one person, one or two people who aren't replicating what they're doing in the business. And I mean, even for me, I know it's really difficult because I feel like there's a certain skill set that I have that I couldn't, put into the arms of someone who's an outside employer or another employee. So how have you helped these leaders overcome that? What are some of the mistakes you see them making and not replicating and scaling? And some, maybe some easy steps that they can do to scale that, even departments, right? Like I may be a chief marketing officer and my department's stagnated because I'm not really replicating my efforts and so on. So.
Right. So it starts with, I like to take a systems level view of the business and work with the senior people and understand, where are your constraints? Is it a person? Is it knowledge? So knowledge based is a constraint, like I described in that engineering organization. And once we've kind of looked at the entire business and we know where the constraints are, then I like to think in terms of, okay, what are the critical processes that support that constraint area? Sometimes people say we have no process there, or it's all in somebody's head, like you're describing yourself. When you boil it down, you got to sit with the people that are doing the work and say, let's map it out in detail. What do you do? And then as you map it out in detail, you can share that and train other people to follow the steps. Now, you may have experienced that they might get to a point where they need to come to you, but if we break it down to 25 steps and 17 can be done by other people, that frees you up to do the critical thinking. But there's 17 or 18 other steps. The other big thing I see is the time it takes to get work done and the queuing that happens. So you got to look at a constraint and say, hey, if it's at one person and there's a big queue in front of them because they're the only person who could do that, then when your customer views you, your lead time is a lot longer. Whether it's new products to market or someone expecting a deliverable, what could be done in 8 hours could take 3 months because of all the queuing that's taking place. So we can look for where the queues are and then figure out what we need to do to reduce the queue time. And often it's eliminating a lot of non-value added activities, waste of waiting, second checks, all those things that go into an overall process flow. So once we've laid out the process, we look for the waste, take the waste out, capture the knowledge as best we can, and then leave to those people that have the critical thinking capability to just do those tasks that's required based on their experience, and then train others to do that level of critical thinking.
Yeah, it's hard. It's some of that info transfer is really difficult. Do you recommend like a platform, some sort of online training, or just having it down in paper? Like what are some of the technical resources you recommend for that?
I've used all of the above that you mentioned. The most common one is really just on paper. It's what we call a process map and a standard operating procedure. So you map out step by step, and then you put in a procedure, the why, the how, the when, that goes with each step. And you can then use video. So in some of my clients, we go to the digital media, and you could actually see, this is for more physical things, a demonstration of someone doing something. So if we're building something, you could say, okay, now we're going to be assembling this circuit card. You're going to be inserting this into this portion. Watch the video, run the video. Oh, I see how that person inserted that. And then there's a detailed instruction step by step. On the more knowledge base, one of the other things that I use is collaboration. So if we're dealing with software or new products, if you're on that end of the business, one of the ways to do knowledge transfer is actually through a collaboration process. So we'll lay out the SOP and we'll lay out swim lanes on who's doing what. But then what we try to do is, rather than doing things in series, we try to do them in parallel and try to get the people into natural work teams sitting in a room together. And what we find out when we do that is people start learning from each other through the collaborative process. And so if a critical person's out, if I've learned through collaboration how to do some of that activity, we can continue the workflow to go. And we save time because we're doing it in parallel. So really, natural work teams and collaborative work is a great way to do knowledge transfer as well.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you find people actually get into a room and talk to one another, and the disconnect that happens otherwise just through Slack or just through everyday, water cooler communications, then like sitting it down, breaking it down. Even our small team, I find it all the time. There's these tiny things that make us more efficient. So it's just, I think you making that apparent is really important.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite stories was a business was trying to grow, and they were doing digital solutions for education. So, for example, English students that are learning English as a second language, young children coming to our country, and they were doing brilliant work with videos and games, electronic games and storybooks, really good stuff, but they could only do 2 releases a year. And so, they're like, geez, you're an engineer. How are you going to help us? So I flew out there, I sat with the team, and I was like, well, how do you guys work? And they started laying it out. We put Post-its up on the wall. I do this, then I give it to this guy. Well, are there any problems with that? Yeah. Then it'll come back to me, and then I've got to make changes because they didn't like something. So they moved 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, one step back. For example, it's the teachers to do a lesson plan. Then it goes to an artist and he says, oh, I'm going to use dinosaurs. And he draws some dinosaurs. Like, well, I don't know, we're going to go to a different direction. Maybe not dinosaurs, maybe something else. And it was really interesting. It'd take them 6 months to do that. I said, well, what if we just storyboarded it and got everybody in the room all at once? Let's do a mock-up of what that would look like. And the teacher talked about the critical of the lesson plan. The artist started storyboarding it. They started deciding, is it going to be a book or a video game or like a video of kids playing something out? And within a couple of hours, everybody knew what they needed to do. It's like, okay, everybody go to work. Now we're working everybody in parallel versus a whole series of events. And they went from 2 releases a year immediately to 4. So we doubled their output in 1 week just by laying out a different way of working. So that was a lot of fun because it was so different than my normal. I'm working with artists and directors and producers and teachers. Same thing. You just got to understand, what are the critical things for growth? What are the key processes? How can we change them?
Absolutely. How do you do that now? I mean, so many companies are remote. Can you get the same effectiveness doing those types of meetings through Zoom, FaceTime calls?
Yes and no. There's something about being there in the room with people and then watching the results. So I can be on the phone now with people, and when the Zoom call ends, it's like, okay, who's going to do what? But then they go back to their day job and people lose focus. So, to really get a result, you almost need to lock yourself in a room for a couple of days. If it's a critical thing to your business, I always say to clients, oh, this is critical to us. Then can we lock ourselves in the room for 4 days? It's hard to do that with Zoom, right? Because as soon as you hang up, it's typically a 1-hour conference and you lay things out and you make an action plan, but you lose that collaboration, you lose that focus because everybody gets distracted. Your phone is ringing, your emails are coming in. So it's not as easy. It's possible, but it seems to me to take a lot longer nowadays that I'm working from my home as opposed to being there with the team and locking them in a room for a couple of days to figure out what's the best way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. So many companies are going to have to stay remote. So
Right.
I hear it on both ends. And I think it depends on the people, depends on the team entirely, I guess, and how good you are at communicating. One other is we talked about 5 more like focal points, like 5 key areas you can improve. Can you touch on those real quick?
Sure. I mean, in terms of 5 key areas to improve, when I lay out 5 areas, I've got at the top level, increase your value add. So, the value added piece we've already covered. The second one we've already covered as well. Take a systems level view of your business and identify what the critical processes are. So to me, that's a very critical one. I'll just throw my glasses on so I don't miss any. So once we've gotten that identity of what the critical processes are, then you focus on improving those processes. And what I mean by that is make them efficient and effective. So efficiency has to do with the amount of time it takes to get work done. And effectiveness is, am I getting the business result? And that's very critical when a customer is looking at you because they value you not for just what you give them, but for how easy it is able for you to do business with them. So you want to make sure that you're efficient and effective on those critical processes. The fourth one that I've got here is related to knowing your constraints, which I've covered. So if a business is going to grow, you got to know where your constraints are that's preventing you from growing, and then focus in on those constraints to enable you to grow. And the last one is the most critical one of all, and that's leadership. So as businesses are looking to grow, they look to their leaders to grow. And what do the leaders need to provide? Well, they need to provide a vision of where we're going. And it's got to be actionable, not some fuzzy thing, but something that's actionable. So I go back to one of the first visions I worked on when I was in aerospace, and I was at a jet engine manufacturer, and we were struggling a little bit. We were losing business to our competition. And so I took over a business unit there, and the employees were all downtrodden because we had layoffs. It was really hard to be a manager during that time. So I put together a very simple vision. It was we win our customers by delivering high-quality products at a competitive cost and delivering on time. And then I added to that, speed is the weapon we'll use to grow our business. Now, how did that translate into things that were actionable, and how do we get employees aligned around that? Number one, we want to win because they felt like we were losing. We're laying people off. We're losing work. So we want to win too. Well, how are we going to know if we're winning? Give them something measurable, right? Well, delivering on time, reducing our costs. And now if I'm an hourly guy and I'm running a machine, how am I reducing cost? Well, we got to teach him how he's reducing cost. Hey, if it took you an hour to do that job and you can get it to 30 minutes, you just cut your cost of that operation 50%. Do you have any ideas how we could reduce the time machining over there? They have 50 ideas on how they could do it. No one ever asked them. So that's a critical part of the overall leadership, is really taking it from the top down into the company. The next part is culture. A lot of people talk about culture, and a lot of people have made it fuzzy. Culture to me was fuzzy when I was younger, but it's very tangible to me now because I see as I've gone around the world.
Our business is like a family, and that's our culture. And it's
it's not. It's
yeah.
Sure. Is really, when you think about it, it's the values and the beliefs and the norms of behavior. And, it doesn't matter the country, it matters the company is the thing I learned. And the culture is set by the leaders, because what behaviors the leaders accept and model becomes the culture of the company. So if people can goof off in a company, if you walk by a department and only 3 out of 10 people are working and nobody says anything and nobody seems nervous, that's because when managers walk by, nobody says anything and nobody's nervous. But if you go by and you say, hey, you have tasks and you need to get these tasks done today, and we're measuring how you're performing because we know you could do 1 every 10 minutes and you should get 6 an hour. If you walk by, you're going to see people working. It's similar in collaboration. We expect you to collaborate, or no, hey, every man for himself, and I'm not helping you because I want to get ahead. You're more successful with a collaborative environment than a dog-eat-dog environment, because I've been in both cultures. And, dog-eat-dog is good for so much, but you're never going to reach your potential unless employees are collaborating. So those are just a few examples of how, leadership needs to model the behavior and then have management systems and KPIs, key performance indicators, that measure the employees to things you want to achieve, because people respond to what they're measured on, and it doesn't matter what the leaders say, it's what they do that shapes the culture. So those are kind of 5 critical things that I think of when I'm working with a business, put things in context in terms of where we need to go. The culture change, the last one, though, it takes the longest. I can improve a process pretty quickly, but the change of culture takes years, unfortunately.
Jim, any other specific tips, secrets, strategies that you would recommend for other business development leaders at this time?
Yeah, from a business development leadership, one of the things I look at from customer and market side is follow the money. Where do we get the money? I worked with a company that the sales organization was trying to figure out, hey, what can we do to grow? We're kind of stagnant right now. And we looked at how they were spreading their BD dollars, and basically they were spreading it equally across all avenues. So we dove into the data and said, well, where's the high margin, high growth opportunities? And we found those. And we said, okay, now let's put an effort proportional to the growth opportunity that we see in that market with those potential customers, as opposed to, spreading similar activity everywhere. It's the same thing I'm doing right now with an active analysis of a client. I'm looking at, they're like, we got to improve our margin and we need to grow. It's like, but you've got like 490 customers and 10 of them are 80% of your revenue. And those guys are your high margin, but you're trying to do all this other stuff that's distracting you. You're trying to be everything to everybody. And they're in a transition. So they got to get away from their old business model and now move their BD and focus to their new business model. And it's going to help them tremendously, because they're going to focus on the critical markets, the critical customers, and grow where the margin is and where the growth potential is, because you get distracted by all these nickel and dime opportunities. And a lot of sales guys want to chase every opportunity. Every dollar counts. But what's a $6,000 account versus a $1 million account? And which one do you want to win? And how many $6,000 accounts do you want to have now that you're a $10 million business? How do you identify the difference between the two? You look at the data. You got to look at the finances. So we drill down on the finances, and we look at the different channels or the different product families. Like you might have product families, you might have channels, you might have segments. So the one customer I was talking about had channels. They were selling furniture. They had, government channel, church channel, the Home Depot type channel, all these different channels for sales. And then we said, which ones are higher margin, which ones are the bigger revenue and which ones have the highest growth potential. And you can look at year over year, but when you really get the sales guys in the room and the BD guys in the room, and you lock them down, they start saying, you know what, if we focused here more, here's really where the growth is. But I don't have time to do it because I'm doing all this other stuff. Say, okay, let's make a decision. Stop doing the other stuff. Let's put 90% of our effort on this growth opportunity, assign different guys, different channels. You can do it regionally, by channel, whatever way makes sense for you. But put your energy and effort to where the margin and growth is. Because people want to grow, but you want to grow profitably. So we always focused on both. Where's the margin? And clearly you get margin by doing more value added. If I'm selling a component versus an assembly, I'm going to make more on the assembly. It's value added. I'm doing the design work. I'm going to make more money. It's value added. So, don't be a pass through and sell that. And if that's your business, get really good at that. But if you want to make more margin, if you're a commodity seller, you're not going to make a lot of margin. Don't cry, because that's what you are. You might need to go to China to get lower cost. But if you want to increase your margin and grow, you got to look at where the growth is and where the margin is. And that's the key.
Most businesses don't work the margin in for themselves.
They don't. Yeah, just doing work, you want to be profitable. I've seen companies actually grow themselves into bankruptcy. Because it happens all the time, exactly. And it's a matter of cash flow and working capital. And they're growing so fast, they're investing in all this working capital. All of a sudden the banks are going, you can't have any more. And then they lose a key account and they're like, I'm sitting on all this inventory. What am I going to do with it? Not money, it's inventory. So if you got to sell it 10 cents on the dollar, now you can't pay your bank covenants, you can't meet your covenants, and you got a cash flow problem. Sometimes they get called too late. And it's like, oh, if only you'd called me a year ago. But it's interesting to think about how businesses grow and how they got to manage so many things to be successful.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, we have mentors like you to guide us along the way and to point us in the right direction, get us right information. And on that note, again, grateful for you making the time. How can people find you, follow you, get into contact with you?
Well, my phone number is the best way. I get lots of calls on my cell phone. It's 860-729-8591. I have a website at leanconnectionllc.com, and my email is Jim, B as in Brian Connolly, at AOL.com. I've had that one for 30 years.
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And those of you listening, do not forget to go subscribe all your favorite podcast apps. Leave a review for us. Always helpful. And we'll see you